Modern humans, Homo sapiens, first entered the region now known as England around 40,000 BC during the Upper Paleolithic period. These populations migrated from continental Europe, likely following the course of rivers and coastal plains that were exposed during periods of lower sea levels in the late Pleistocene. At this time, the climate of England was heavily influenced by the last glacial maximum, resulting in a landscape dominated by tundra, steppe and glacial rivers in the north with mixed forests in the south, where microclimates allowed for seasonal vegetation growth. Glaciers covered large portions of northern England, including Cumbria and Northumberland, while southern regions such as Sussex and Kent provided relatively habitable zones for human settlement. The Upper Paleolithic inhabitants of England relied primarily on a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, exploiting large mammals such as woolly mammoths, Mammuthus primigenius, reindeer, Rangifer tarandus, aurochs, Bos primigenius, wild horses, Equus ferus, red deer, Cervus elephas, and various smaller game species. Archaeological evidence indicates that hunting strategies were adapted to the seasonal migrations of these animals. Large spear points, flint blades, and scrapers have been found at sites such as Cresswell Crags in Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire, which demonstrate sophisticated lithic technology. These tools were often fashioned from high-quality flint and exhibited standardized forms, reflecting specialized craftsmanship and a degree of knowledge transmission across generations. In addition to hunting, these populations gathered plant resources, including wild fruits, nuts, and tubers. Stable isotope analysis of skeletal remains suggests that the Upper Paleolithic diet in England was varied and seasonally adaptive, with significant reliance on both terrestrial and aquatic sources. Riverine environments provided fish, shellfish, and waterfowl, supplementing protein intake, while the surrounding woodlands and grasslands offered edible plant matter and materials for toolmaking and shelter. Evidence from sites such as Gough's Cave in Somerset reveals that Upper Paleolithic populations engaged in advanced behaviors beyond basic subsistence. Gough's Cave has yielded worked human and animal bones, including cut-marked skulls, suggesting mortuary practices and possibly ritualistic behavior. The site also contains flint and bone tools, indicating continued refinement in toolmaking techniques and the use of bone as a raw material for needles, awls, and points. The craftsmanship observed in these tools reflects a capacity for abstract thought and complex planning. Cresswell Crags also provides evidence of early symbolic behavior. Carvings on limestone walls include depictions of animals such as deer, bison, and horses, representing some of the earliest known figurative art in Britain. The presence of these carvings indicates cognitive sophistication, including the ability to abstractly represent and communicate concepts visually. Ornamentation on tools, such as incised patterns and decorated points, further reflects emerging cultural complexity and the development of identity markers within groups. Shelter and habitation strategies in Upper Paleolithic England were varied and adapted to environmental conditions. Seasonal campsites in sheltered areas, including caves and rock overhangs, are protected from harsh climates. Archaeological evidence indicates that these shelters were organized, with hearths constructed for cooking and warmth. Temporary structures made from wood and animal hides likely supplemented caves, allowing mobility in response to resource availability. Site analysis shows evidence of repeated seasonal occupation, suggesting that groups had knowledge of local landscapes animal migratory patterns, and resource distribution. Population density in Upper Paleolithic England was relatively low, constrained by environmental factors and the availability of resources. Estimates suggest that small, mobile bands ranging from 20 to 50 individuals likely occupied distinct territories, moving cyclically to exploit seasonal abundance. Genetic studies indicate that these populations were part of a broader European network of Upper Paleolithic humans, with evidence of migration and occasional gene flow from continental populations. This connectivity may have facilitated the exchange of technological innovations, tool-making techniques, and symbolic practices. Environmental fluctuations during this period played a significant role in shaping human adaptation. Recurrent glacial advances and retreats caused dramatic shifts in habitat distribution. During colder stadials, tundra and steppe environments predominated, reducing the availability of forest resources. In interstadial periods, warmer climates allowed the re-expansion of woodlands, supporting a wider range of plant and animal species. Human groups in England demonstrated flexibility in adapting to these changing conditions, adjusting hunting strategies, mobility patterns, and settlement locations accordingly. The Upper Paleolithic period also witnessed the development of complex social behavior and cultural transmission. The standardization of tool forms, shared carving motifs, and evidence of symbolic activity suggest a structured social organization. Knowledge of tool production, hunting strategies, and shelter construction was likely transmitted orally and through hands-on teaching, establishing cultural continuity across generations. Evidence of trade or movement of raw materials over distances of tens of kilometers has been inferred from the sourcing of flint and other lithic materials, indicating interaction between separate groups. Following the end of the Upper Paleolithic period and the retreat of the last ice sheets in England, the Mesolithic period began around 10,000 BC. This period was characterized by significant environmental, technological, and social changes that shaped human adaptation in the post-glacial landscapes of England. The transition from the Pleistocene to the Holocene epoch brought warmer climates, rising sea levels, and the gradual expansion of forests across previously tundra-dominated regions. These environmental transformations created new habitats, including dense woodlands, river valleys, lakes, marshes, and coastal areas, which provided abundant resources for human populations. Mesolithic populations in England maintained a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, building upon the subsistence strategies of Upper Paleolithic humans, but adapting them to more forested and temperate conditions. Large game species, including red deer, Cervus elephas, elk, Alces alces, aurochs, Bos primigenius, wild pigs, Sus scrofa, and smaller mammals, continued to be significant components of the diet. Hunting strategies involved the use of bows and arrows, spears, and traps, with a particular emphasis on ambush hunting in forested environments. Seasonal variation in resource availability required mobility, with groups following predictable patterns of game migration, plant ripening cycles, and fish spawning. Fish and aquatic resources became increasingly important in Mesolithic diets. Riverine, lacustrine, and coastal habitats supported salmon, trout, eel, shellfish, and waterfowl. Fishing technology included the use of barbed bone points, spears, nets, and traps. Shell middens, particularly along coastal areas such as the Isle of Wight and the Solent, provide extensive evidence of systematic exploitation of mollusks and marine species. Stable isotope analyses of skeletal remains indicate that aquatic protein contributed substantially to the diet, particularly in regions with high river density or access to estuarine environments. Mesolithic tool technology evolved significantly in response to these ecological conditions. Microliths, small geometric flint blades typically less than 5 centimeters long, became the defining feature of the period. These microliths were commonly hafted into composite tools such as arrows, sickles, and harpoons, allowing for increased efficiency in hunting, fishing, and plant harvesting. Toolkits also included scrapers, burins, awls, and perforators made from flint, chert, and bone, demonstrating a continuity of skilled lithic craftsmanship from the Upper Paleolithic. Evidence from sites such as Starcar in North Yorkshire shows finely crafted bone points and antler harpoons, highlighting specialized technologies adapted to wetland and lacustrine environments. The site of Starcar, occupied between approximately 9000 BC and 8500 BC, provides the most detailed insight into Mesolithic life in England. Excavations reveal evidence of a permanent or semi-permanent settlement on the edge of a former paleolake, with wooden platforms, hearths, and post holes indicating constructed living surfaces. Artifacts include barbed bone points for fishing, red deer antler frontlets, and carved objects. These findings suggest not only subsistence activities, but also ritualized or symbolic behavior, indicating the cultural complexity of Mesolithic communities. Settlement patterns during the Mesolithic were influenced by resource availability, topography, and seasonal mobility. Populations often established temporary camps in forest clearings, river terraces, or lakeshore locations, moving cyclically between winter and summer sites. Archaeological evidence indicates that some areas experienced repeated occupation over multiple generations, reflecting a detailed understanding of local ecological cycles. Sites are typically small, reflecting the low population density of Mesolithic England, estimated to have been only a few thousand individuals at most, distributed in small bands across the landscape. Material culture also included early examples of personal ornamentation. Shell beads, animal teeth, and perforated animal bones suggest symbolic display, potentially functioning in social signaling, identity, or group cohesion. These objects, combined with the standardized production of tools, demonstrate continuity of learned skills and the transmission of knowledge within and between groups. The presence of non-local materials, such as flint from distant sources, indicates trade or movement across regions, with raw materials transported tens of kilometers to occupation sites. Domestication of animals may have begun in this period, although the evidence is sparse and contested. Some sites indicate the capture and management of wild species such as dogs, Canis lupus familiaris, which were likely used for hunting assistance, protection, and possibly companionship. The appearance of domesticated plants is negligible, with subsistence still dominated by foraged wild cereals, fruits, nuts, and roots. The onset of domestication, however, foreshadowed the Neolithic transition that would occur around 4000 BC. Mesolithic populations in England adapted to changing landscapes following the Holocene sea level rise. Between 10,000 BC and 6000 BC, post-glacial transgression led to the flooding of low-lying areas and the formation of new coastlines, estuaries, and river systems. Groups residing in now submerged areas, such as Doggerland in the southern North Sea, would have been forced to relocate inland, contributing to population redistribution and regional variation in settlement patterns. Coastal adaptation included the exploitation of tidal flats, estuarine resources, and shellfish, which became a predictable and abundant food source. Evidence from burial sites and ritual deposits indicates emerging social complexity during the Mesolithic. Human burials, occasionally associated with grave goods such as ochre, animal remains, or tools, provide insights into symbolic behavior, status differentiation, and belief systems. Certain deposits, such as wooden platforms and votive offerings found in wetland contexts, suggest ceremonial practices closely linked to water and forest environments. These ritual behaviors indicate cognitive and cultural sophistication extending beyond immediate subsistence concerns. Environmental and climatic variability influenced Mesolithic subsistence and settlement. The early Holocene experienced periods of climatic oscillation, including the pre-boreal warming and oscillatory cooling events, which affected vegetation distribution, river flow, and animal populations. Human groups demonstrated adaptive strategies, including diversification of resources, technological innovation, and flexible mobility. Archaeobotanical analysis shows the collection of hazelnuts, berries, and other forest products, supplementing hunting and fishing and allowing populations to survive periods of resource scarcity. Technological innovation also extended to woodworking and construction. Mesolithic groups employed bone and antler tools for woodworking, including the shaping of spears, harpoons, and possibly dugout canoes. Sites such as Starkar provide evidence of wooden platforms constructed to stabilize living areas in wetland environments. These structures demonstrate planning, cooperative labor, and knowledge of local environmental conditions. Canoes and watercraft, although rarely preserved archaeologically, would have facilitated transportation, fishing, and trade across rivers and lakes. The social organization of Mesolithic populations was structured around small, mobile bands. These groups likely consisted of extended family units or small cooperative communities numbering between 20 and 50 individuals. Leadership was likely situational, based on skill, experience, or knowledge of the landscape and resources. Interaction between bands, evidenced by shared tool types, stylistic similarities in ornamentation, and exchange of raw materials, suggests networks of communication and information transfer across regional landscapes. By approximately 4000 BC, Mesolithic populations in England had fully adapted to forested, post-glacial environments, exhibiting technological specialization, social networks, and environmental knowledge that allowed population stability and territorial understanding. These adaptations laid the groundwork for the transition to the Neolithic period, during which agriculture, permanent settlements, and large-scale ceremonial constructions would transform human society in England. Mesolithic developments, including microlith technology, seasonal mobility patterns, fishing, and hunting strategies, ritualized practices, and symbolic expression, constitute the foundation of cultural continuity into the later prehistoric periods. The Neolithic period in England, beginning around 4000 BC and extending to approximately 2500 BC, represents a fundamental transformation in human subsistence, settlement patterns, technology, and social organization. This period marks the introduction of agriculture, the domestication of animals, and the establishment of permanent settlements, replacing the primarily mobile hunter-gatherer lifestyles of the Mesolithic. The Neolithic transition occurred in the context of climatic stability during the early Holocene, with warmer temperatures and established forested landscapes facilitating long-term occupation of specific regions. Farming practices were introduced from continental Europe, likely via migration and cultural diffusion from the Near East through France and the Low Countries. Archaeobotanical evidence indicates the cultivation of cereals such as wheat, Triticum spp, and barley, Hordeum spp, in southern and central England. These cereals supplemented wild plant foods and formed the basis of more reliable, seasonal caloric intake. The domestication of livestock, including cattle, Bos taurus, sheep, Ovis aries, and goats, Capra hircus, provided not only meat but also secondary products such as milk, hides, and wool, enabling new forms of economic production and material culture. Pigs, Sus scrofa domesticus, were also kept, contributing to diversified animal husbandry. Permanent settlements emerged as Neolithic populations developed sedentary lifestyles. Sites often consisted of circular or rectangular timber structures, with evidence of post-hole arrangements and wattle and daub construction techniques. Villages varied in size, but typically housed small communities of several dozen individuals. Settlement placement was influenced by proximity to arable land, freshwater sources, and raw materials, including flint for tool production and timber for construction. Archaeological evidence indicates that settlements were organized with functional areas for habitation, storage, and craft production, reflecting a degree of social coordination. Monumental architecture is a defining feature of the Neolithic period in England. Long barrows, causewayed enclosures, hengests, and stone circles reflect ritualized activity, social organization, and the ability to mobilize communal labor. Long barrows, constructed of earth and timber, served as burial monuments for collective interments, sometimes containing cremated or articulated human remains. Sites such as West Kennet Long Barrow in Wiltshire demonstrate complex construction methods, with chambers and passageways aligned in accordance with local topography or astronomical considerations. Causewayed enclosures, consisting of concentric ditches with intermittent causeways, likely served multiple functions, including defensive, ceremonial, and communal gatherings. Hengests, including sites such as Avebury and Dynton walls, display precisely arranged stone or timber features forming circular enclosures, often associated with ritual or calendrical functions. Stone circles, exemplified by Avebury, illustrate large-scale organization and planning, suggesting sustained social cohesion and shared cultural practices. Neolithic communities also engaged in long-distance trade and resource exchange. Flint axes, particularly those of high-quality flint sourced from southern England and the Midlands, were distributed widely, indicating structured exchange networks. Similarly, exotic materials, including greenstone, jadeite, and polished stone axes from continental Europe, have been found in England, demonstrating interaction with broader European Neolithic populations. Trade facilitated not only access to raw materials, but also the transmission of technological innovations and cultural ideas, reinforcing regional and super-regional social connections. Agricultural practices during the Neolithic involved both arable and pastoral systems. Evidence from pollen cores, charred plant remains, and soil micromorphology indicates that cereal fields were maintained with techniques such as slash-and-burn clearance, controlled grazing, and periodic fallow. Animal husbandry supplemented plant cultivation, with herding strategies reflecting seasonal patterns and resource availability. Domestic animals were likely managed collectively, and their products, including milk and hides, contributed to both subsistence and craft production. The combination of arable cultivation and pastoralism allowed Neolithic populations to support higher densities than previously possible, although population estimates remain modest, with regional variations depending on environmental suitability. Material culture in Neolithic England expanded beyond subsistence tools. Polished stone axes, flint blades, bone implements, and pottery were standard components of everyday life. Pottery, including forms such as the carinated bowl and plain bowl styles, served domestic storage, cooking, and ceremonial purposes. The production of pottery indicates not only technical skill, but also the integration of craft specialization within communities. Ornamentation, including incised decorations and geometric motifs, reflects aesthetic expression and symbolic communication within social networks. The production and maintenance of these artifacts required knowledge transmission and intergenerational learning, contributing to cultural continuity. Human skeletal remains from the Neolithic period indicate changes in health and diet relative to Mesolithic populations. While cereal-based diets provided reliable caloric intake, they also introduced dietary stress, as evidenced by dental caries, enamel hypoplasia, and skeletal markers of malnutrition. Analysis of isotopic signatures demonstrates increased reliance on domesticated cereals and livestock protein, with a gradual decline in the consumption of wild game compared to the Mesolithic period. Burial practices, including communal interments in long barrows and single inhumations in causewayed enclosures, reveal variation in ritual behavior and social differentiation, suggesting emerging hierarchical structures within communities. The Neolithic period also exhibits evidence of ritualized landscapes and cosmological awareness. The alignment of monuments, particularly henges and stone circles, with solar, lunar, or seasonal phenomena indicates knowledge of astronomical cycles and their integration into social and ceremonial life. Landscapes were deliberately modified through excavation, earthworks, and construction, representing intentional manipulation for cultural or spiritual purposes. Sites such as Avebury, Orkney's Ness of Brodger, and Doington Walls exemplify large-scale planning and labor organization, implying coordinated effort across multiple communities. Environmental adaptation remained central to Neolithic life. Deforestation, clearance of undergrowth for cultivation, and controlled burning practices modified local ecologies to create arable land while managing forest regeneration. Communities adapted to riverine, floodplain, and coastal environments for agriculture, water supply, and transportation. Settlement proximity to resources such as flint, clay, and timber reflects an understanding of resource distribution and logistical planning. Archaeological evidence of trackways, causeways, and wooden platforms indicates early infrastructural development to facilitate movement and land use in wet or unstable terrain. Social organization in Neolithic England was increasingly complex compared to Mesolithic hunter-gatherer bands. Communities were likely composed of extended family units with cooperative labor arrangements for agricultural production, monument construction, and craft specialization. Leadership may have been situational or ceremonial, particularly in organizing collective labor for ritual monuments or managing communal agricultural practices. Evidence of differentiated burials, prestige goods, and monumental construction suggest the emergence of social stratification, though on a relatively small scale. Networks of exchange and communication extended across regions, with shared artifact styles and construction techniques indicating a degree of cultural cohesion and regional identity. By approximately 2500 BC, Neolithic England had fully established agricultural economies, permanent settlements, monumental architecture, and social structures capable of sustaining small to medium-sized communities. Technological innovation, including polished stone axes, pottery production, and construction techniques, coupled with symbolic and ritualized behavior, reflects a society capable of long-term planning, knowledge transmission, and cultural continuity. These developments laid the foundation for subsequent transformations during the Bronze Age, including metal technology, hierarchical organization, and expanded trade networks. The Bronze Age in England, spanning approximately 2500 BC to 800 BC, represents a period of technological, social, and cultural transformation that followed the Neolithic period. The defining characteristic of this era was the introduction and widespread adoption of metalworking technologies, particularly bronze, an alloy of copper and tin. This technological innovation had profound effects on subsistence practices, trade networks, settlement patterns, and social hierarchy. The onset of the Bronze Age coincided with continuing climatic stability in the Holocene, supporting dense woodland cover, river valleys, fertile soils, and increasingly structured human settlements. The earliest evidence of bronze production in England dates to around 2500 BC, with initial sites located primarily in southern and central regions where both copper and tin could be obtained either locally or through long-distance exchange. Tin, scarce in southern England, was most abundantly sourced from Cornwall and Devon, while copper was obtained from local deposits and imported from continental Europe. Bronze casting technology required significant skill and knowledge, including the preparation of molds, precise control of high-temperature furnaces, and alloying techniques to produce durable tools and weapons. The introduction of bronze enabled the production of tools that were more effective and longer-lasting than their stone predecessors, transforming agriculture, woodworking, and warfare. Bronze implements included axes, adzes, knives, swords, spearheads, and sickles. Polished stone axes persisted for some decades, but bronze tools gradually supplanted stone in both domestic and ceremonial contexts. Axes of high-quality bronze, often elaborately decorated, served as both practical implements and symbols of status. The refinement of casting techniques allowed the creation of molds for multiple identical objects, indicating standardization in production and the emergence of specialized craft knowledge. Weapons such as bronze daggers, spearheads, and shields reflect both technological progress and the increasing prevalence of organized conflict or social competition during this period. Settlement patterns during the Bronze Age reflect the combination of agricultural expansion and defensive considerations. Permanent and semi-permanent settlements were established on fertile soils, river terraces, and lowland valleys suitable for cereal cultivation and pasture. Archaeological evidence indicates that roundhouses became standard domestic structures, constructed with timber posts, wattle and daub walls, and thatched roofs. The average diameter of roundhouses ranges from 5 to 12 meters, providing accommodation for extended family units or small kin groups. Villages often consisted of clusters of several roundhouses, with enclosures for livestock and storage pits for surplus crops, reflecting increasingly organized agricultural economies. Hill forts and defended settlements became prominent features of the Bronze Age landscape from around 1200 BC onwards. Early hill forts, often situated on elevated ridges, provided defensible positions in response to social competition and regional conflicts. These sites were enclosed by banks, ditches, or timber palisades and often served dual functions as centers of settlement and community organization. Excavations reveal internal divisions within hill forts, including areas for habitation, livestock, and craft production, demonstrating a degree of planning and hierarchical social control. Hill forts are concentrated in regions such as Wessex, the Cotswolds, and the Welsh borderlands, reflecting both resource distribution and strategic importance. Trade and exchange networks expanded considerably during the Bronze Age. Tin and copper were transported over long distances, often exceeding hundreds of kilometers, connecting England with continental Europe and potentially with Mediterranean production centers. The exchange of metals facilitated the production of elite items, ceremonial objects, and standard tools. In addition to metals, materials such as amber from the Baltic, gold from Ireland, jet from Yorkshire, and faience from continental sources indicate wide-ranging connections and the movement of luxury goods. These exchanges were integral to the establishment of social prestige and political alliances, reflecting increasingly complex hierarchical structures within Bronze Age communities. Burial practices in the Bronze Age demonstrate both continuity with Neolithic traditions and the emergence of new social and ideological structures. Round barrows and cairns served as primary funerary monuments, often containing single or multiple interments accompanied by grave goods such as bronze weapons, ornaments, pottery, and textiles. Cremation gradually became more prevalent during the Middle and Late Bronze Age, reflecting changing beliefs about death and the afterlife. Barrows were often placed in prominent positions within the landscape, visible from settlements and trade routes, suggesting an intentional assertion of social presence and territoriality. Elite burials, such as those containing multiple bronze artifacts or gold objects, indicate emerging social stratification and the development of hierarchical leadership. Material culture in the Bronze Age extended beyond metal implements. Pottery remained an essential domestic and ceremonial component, with regional styles including the Deverell Rimbury and Peterborough types. Pottery vessels were used for storage, cooking, and ritual deposition, frequently found in association with barrows or settlement contexts. Ornamentation on personal items, such as necklaces, bracelets, and pins, often incorporated metal, bone, jet, or shell, reflecting aesthetic preferences and the demonstration of status. Textile production is inferred from spindle whorls and loom weights, indicating the manufacture of woven fabrics for clothing, domestic use, and ceremonial purposes. Agricultural practices were enhanced by the adoption of bronze tools, allowing more effective clearance of woodland, soil tillage, and harvesting. Cereal cultivation, including wheat and barley, continued to dominate, complemented by legumes, flax, and the management of domesticated animals. Livestock herding included cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs, providing meat, milk, hides, and wool. Seasonal movement of animals to exploit grazing areas was maintained, particularly in upland regions. Pollen and macrofossil analyses indicate that anthropogenic modification of landscapes, including deforestation, controlled burning, and pasture creation, was widespread, demonstrating the significant ecological impact of Bronze Age communities. Ceremonial and ritual activity persisted throughout the Bronze Age, frequently associated with monuments, barrows, and open-air sites. Stone circles, such as those at Stanton Drew and Swinside, and large wooden constructions indicate continued engagement with cosmological cycles, solar alignments, and community rituals. Depositional practices, including the placement of metal hoards in rivers, wetlands, or pits, provide evidence of ritualized offerings and symbolic behavior. These practices suggest a continuity of belief systems from the Neolithic, adapted to the changing social and technological landscape of the Bronze Age. Environmental adaptation remained central to human activity. Communities responded to both climatic stability and localized fluctuations in precipitation or temperature. Settlements were situated to maximize access to arable land, freshwater, and raw materials while mitigating risks from flooding or soil degradation. Archaeological evidence demonstrates the construction of trackways, causeways, and drainage features to facilitate movement, land use, and the management of waterlogged soils. These infrastructural measures reflect advanced environmental knowledge and the capacity to manipulate landscapes for agricultural and settlement purposes. Social organization in Bronze Age England became increasingly hierarchical. Evidence of elite burials, control of metal production, and monument construction indicates centralized authority at local and regional levels. Kin groups, extended families, or small tribal units formed the basic social structure, while networks of exchange, ceremonial gatherings, and defensive settlements suggest coordination across wider territories. The ability to mobilize labor for large-scale projects, including barrows, henges, and hill forts, reflects complex leadership structures and social cohesion within and between communities. By the Middle to Late Bronze Age, around 1200 BC to 800 BC, metalworking technologies had reached a level of sophistication allowing the production of complex tools, weapons, and ornaments. Sword production, fine bronze daggers, and socketed axes indicate both functional and ceremonial usage. The standardization of objects, including molds and casting techniques, demonstrates technological knowledge transmission and specialized craftsmanship. Trade networks continued to facilitate the circulation of metals, ornaments, and prestige goods across England and into continental Europe, reinforcing hierarchical social structures and cultural cohesion. The Bronze Age also marked increased regional variation in cultural and technological practices. Southern England, particularly Wessex and the Thames Valley, exhibits dense settlement patterns, monumental construction, and elaborate burial practices, while northern and western regions such as Cumbria, Yorkshire, and Wales demonstrate smaller-scale settlements, hill forts, and localized material traditions. Coastal regions engaged in maritime trade and resource exploitation, while inland river valleys functioned as corridors for exchange, settlement, and agricultural expansion. By 800 BC, the culmination of Bronze Age developments had created societies capable of sustained agricultural production, metalworking, complex social hierarchies, regional trade networks, and ceremonial practices embedded in landscape management. These developments established the technological, economic, and social conditions that would facilitate the transition to the Iron Age, during which iron metallurgy, tribal organization, and intensified regional competition would redefine human occupation in England. The Iron Age in England, commencing approximately 800 BC and continuing until the Roman conquest in 43 AD, represents a period of significant technological, social, and political transformation. The defining feature of this era was the introduction and widespread adoption of iron metallurgy, which replaced bronze for tools, weapons, and ornaments. Iron technology, while initially less efficient than bronze in casting, offered greater availability due to the widespread distribution of iron ore across England, reducing reliance on long-distance trade networks necessary for bronze production. The transition to iron technology coincided with continued agricultural intensification, settlement expansion, and increasing social stratification. Ironworking was introduced to England through contact with continental Europe, particularly from Hallstatt and Latin cultural areas in Central and Western Europe. Early iron artifacts included tools such as plowshares, sickles, knives, and chisels, which enabled more efficient cultivation of soils and woodworking. Weaponry, including swords, spearheads, and shields, was increasingly produced from iron, enhancing the military capacity of communities and contributing to the formation of organized tribal groups. Iron production required specialized knowledge of smelting, forging, and carburization techniques, with evidence of small furnaces, slag deposits, and workshop sites concentrated near or sources. The social and political landscape of Iron Age England was organized around Celtic-speaking tribal societies. Major tribes documented through classical sources and archaeological evidence included the Catavilani, Iceni, Trinovants, Atrebates, Debuni, Cornovii, Brigantes, and Siluris. These tribes controlled distinct territories, often defined by natural boundaries such as rivers, hills, and forests. Leadership structures within tribes were hierarchical, typically consisting of chieftains or kings who exercised authority over kin-based groups. Elite control of resources, including arable land, livestock, metalworking, and trade networks, reinforced social stratification. Settlements in the Iron Age were diverse, ranging from small farmsteads to large hill forts and oppida, which functioned as political, economic, and defensive centers. Hill forts, constructed from timber, earth, and stone, were strategically located on elevated terrain to provide visibility over surrounding landscapes and a defensive advantage. Excavations reveal internal divisions including habitation areas, livestock enclosures, storage facilities, and craft production zones. Oppida, larger enclosed settlements typically located along trade routes, emerged by the late Iron Age as centers of population, administration, and commerce. These sites display evidence of planned layouts, including streets, workshops, and communal areas, indicating increasing urbanization within tribal contexts. Agriculture and animal husbandry remained central to Iron Age subsistence. Cereals such as wheat and barley were cultivated using iron plows and hoes, improving productivity compared to Neolithic and Bronze Age methods. Pastoralism included cattle, sheep, pigs, and goats, providing meat, milk, hides, and secondary products. Seasonal transhumance was practiced in upland regions to maximize grazing resources. Storage of surplus crops in pits, granaries, and raised structures allowed for more stable food security, enabling population growth and supporting larger settlements. Evidence of orchard cultivation and the gathering of wild resources continued alongside domesticated crops, reflecting diversified subsistence strategies. Trade and exchange networks intensified during the Iron Age. Contact with continental Europe, particularly Gaul, facilitated the introduction of imported goods, including fine pottery, glass beads, and coinage in later periods. Bronze and iron items continued to circulate regionally, while local production of pottery, textiles, and metal implements supplied domestic and ceremonial needs. The movement of goods over rivers, coastal routes, and land corridors strengthened economic and social ties between tribes, enabling the diffusion of technology, styles, and cultural practices. Material culture in Iron Age England expanded and diversified. Pottery vessels, including storage jars, bowls, and beakers, were produced regionally and often decorated with incised patterns, cord impressions, or stamping techniques. Metalwork included weapons, tools, fibulae, bracelets, and torques, reflecting both utilitarian and symbolic functions. Ironworking artifacts from smithing sites indicate high technical competence, with evidence of blade forging, carburization, and repair practices. Objects of personal adornment, including gold and bronze jewelry, suggest status differentiation and social display. Craft specialization, particularly in metalworking, woodworking, and pottery production, became more prominent in larger settlements and oppida. Religious and ritual practices in Iron Age England were maintained by a combination of public and private ceremonies. Druids served as religious leaders, arbitrators, and custodians of oral traditions, overseeing ritual practices associated with natural cycles, seasonal festivals, and territorial claims. Archaeological evidence, including votive deposits of metal objects, animal remains, and occasional human sacrifice in rivers, bogs, and wetlands, indicates ritualized offerings intended to reinforce social and cosmological order. Sacred groves, springs, and elevated sites were used for ceremonies, demonstrating continuity with Neolithic and Bronze Age traditions adapted to Iron Age societal contexts. Conflict and warfare were recurring features of the Iron Age. Competition between tribes, internal disputes over territory, and elite consolidation efforts resulted in both small-scale raids and larger military campaigns. Hill forts often served as refuges during periods of conflict, and fortifications included multiple defensive banks, ditches, and palisades. The production of iron weapons, combined with organized training and tactical knowledge, enhanced the capacity of tribes to assert territorial control and protect economic resources. Recorded instances, such as those described by Roman sources in the 1st century BC and 1st century AD, suggest that warfare was both endemic and socially significant, influencing political organization and alliances. Settlement and landscape modification in the Iron Age reflect increasing human intervention in local environments. Clearance of woodland for fields, construction of trackways, terraces, and enclosures demonstrate organized labor and environmental management. Pollen and soil analyses show anthropogenic impacts, including selective deforestation, grazing pressure, and soil erosion. Communities demonstrated knowledge of hydrology, soil fertility, and resource distribution to optimize settlement location, crop production, and livestock management. Archaeological evidence also indicates the use of earthworks and water management systems to protect settlements and agricultural land from flooding. By the late Iron Age, Particularly during the 1st century BC, England exhibited a dense network of settlements, hill forts, and oppida reflecting political complexity and regional integration. Tribes engaged in ritual, trade, agriculture, and metallurgy within a framework of hierarchical social structures. Material culture demonstrates a high degree of technical skill, artistic expression, and functional utility, while settlement patterns indicate both strategic planning and environmental adaptation. Contact with continental Europe, particularly through trade and migration, influenced technological development, cultural practices, and socio-political organization. The Late Iron Age also saw the emergence of proto-urban centers and the consolidation of power among tribal elites. Sites such as Colchester, Camulodunum, Verulamium, and other oppida illustrate population aggregation, administrative organization, and strategic location along trade routes. Economic specialization, including metalworking, craft production, and controlled agriculture, supported population growth and social differentiation. Ritual practices remained integrated within settlement contexts, reinforcing elite authority, social cohesion, and territorial claims. By the 1st century AD, England was characterized by a mosaic of Celtic-speaking tribes, each maintaining territorial control, social hierarchy, agricultural production, and trade networks. Tribal leadership, reinforced by military capability, ritual authority, and control over resources, facilitated both internal governance and intertribal interactions. Communities were organized around settlements ranging from isolated farmsteads to fortified hill forts and large oppida, reflecting social, economic, and defensive priorities. Metallurgical expertise, trade networks, ritual practice, and landscape management defined Iron Age culture and society, setting the stage for the Roman invasion and subsequent integration into the Roman Empire. The Roman period in England began with the invasion led by Emperor Claudius in 43 AD, initiating the formal integration of southern and central England into the Roman Empire. Roman Britain, as the province was known, experienced significant transformation in governance, infrastructure, settlement patterns, economy, and culture, while maintaining continuity with existing Celtic tribal structures in certain regions. The Roman occupation extended over approximately 4 centuries, during which time England was incorporated into imperial administrative, military, and economic systems, facilitating urbanization, trade expansion, and cultural exchange. The initial conquest was directed against resistant tribal territories, including the Cativalani under Caratacus and the Trinovants in the southeast. Roman military strategy combined the establishment of fortified bases, the construction of roads, and incremental territorial control. By the mid-1st century AD, the Romans had subdued significant portions of southern and central England, although northern and western regions remained contested. The Roman military presence, composed of legions and auxiliary units, established forts, temporary marching camps, and permanent bases, which provided security, logistical support, and administrative control over conquered territories. Urbanization and infrastructure development were central to Roman administration. The foundation of towns, including Londinium, London, Camulodunum, Colchester, Verulamium, St. Albans, and Caliva Atrebatum, Silchester, served as administrative centers, commercial hubs, and military garrisons. Towns were designed according to standard Roman urban planning principles, incorporating grid street patterns, forums, basilicas, public baths, amphitheaters, and temples. The development of roads, such as Watling Street, Fosse Way, and Ermine Street, facilitated the movement of troops, trade goods, and administrative personnel while connecting urban centers across the province. Bridges, aqueducts, and drainage systems reflected Roman engineering expertise and improved transportation, water management, and sanitation. Military installations remained a defining feature of Roman Britain. Forts and fortresses, often constructed in strategic locations near rivers, roads, or tribal boundaries, housed cohorts, auxiliaries, and legionary detachments. The construction of Hadrian's Wall, beginning in 122 AD, spanning the width of northern England, marked a permanent northern boundary, providing defense against northern tribal incursions. The Antonine Wall in southern Scotland, constructed later and eventually abandoned, represented a temporary extension of Roman control. These military structures included ditches, ramparts, gates, barracks, granaries, and watchtowers, demonstrating systematic planning and logistical organization. Auxiliary forts supported patrol and reconnaissance operations, while supply depots and roads ensured rapid troop deployment across provincial territories. The Roman administration implemented a provincial system that integrated existing tribal structures while imposing imperial governance. Civic administration was conducted through local councils, magistracies, and municipia, which oversaw taxation, justice, and public works. Roman law, including codified statutes and legal procedures, was enforced alongside customary tribal laws in certain areas. Taxation systems facilitated the collection of tribute, which supported military expenditure, infrastructure maintenance, and urban development. Latin became the administrative and commercial language, although Celtic languages persisted in rural areas, maintaining continuity in local communication and oral traditions. Economically, Roman Britain experienced increased agricultural production, artisanal specialization, and trade integration. Roman technological innovations, including iron plows, mills, and irrigation techniques, improved crop yields, particularly in wheat, barley, oats, and legumes. Large estates, or villa complexes, developed in fertile regions, combining residential, agricultural, and industrial functions. Villas incorporated underfloor heating, hypocaust, storage facilities, workshops, and granaries, demonstrating advanced domestic and productive organization. Livestock husbandry, including cattle, sheep, pigs, and horses, supplemented arable agriculture, providing food, labor, and secondary products such as milk, wool, hides, and transportation. Trade expanded within Britain and across the Roman Empire. Imported goods included wine from Gaul, olive oil from the Mediterranean, ceramics such as Samian ware, glassware, and luxury textiles. Metal resources, including iron, lead, tin, and silver, were exploited for local consumption and export. Inland and coastal transport relied on rivers, canals, and well-constructed roads, connecting rural production sites to urban centers and ports. Markets in towns facilitated the circulation of goods, services, and coinage, while standardized currency supported commercial transactions, taxation, and military payments. Religious practices in Roman Britain reflected a combination of imperial, local, and syncretic traditions. Roman deities, including Jupiter, Mars, Minerva, and Venus, were worshipped alongside localized Celtic gods, creating hybridized cults and religious observances. Temples, shrines, and altars were constructed within towns, villas, and rural sanctuaries, often incorporating both Roman architectural features and indigenous symbolism. Evidence from votive deposits, inscriptions, and dedicatory offerings indicates ritual activity across social strata. Christianity gradually spread from the late 3rd century AD, evidenced by burial practices, inscriptions, and ecclesiastical structures, contributing to religious diversity before the Roman withdrawal. Resistance to Roman authority persisted throughout the occupation. Notable revolts, including Boudicca's rebellion in 60 to 61 AD, reflected opposition to imperial control, taxation, and exploitation. The Iceni and Trinovans led coordinated attacks on Roman settlements, resulting in the destruction of Camulodunum and the temporary destabilization of southeastern England. Roman military response, led by governors such as Suetonius Paulinus, reasserted control through strategic deployment of legions and punitive measures. Other localized insurrections occurred throughout the province, though the military and administrative apparatus generally maintained stability and Roman dominance. Roman influence extended to material culture, daily life, and technological innovation. Architectural techniques, including stone construction, hypocaust heating, and tiled roofing, were widely adopted. Pottery production and decorative arts reflected Roman styles, while imported amphorae, glassware, and luxury goods facilitated the adoption of imperial tastes. Urban planning, including organized street grids, drainage systems, and public buildings, reflected systematic design principles. Metalworking, masonry, carpentry, and textile production benefited from Roman technological knowledge, while local artisans adapted techniques to regional resources and needs. Demography and population distribution were transformed by Roman occupation. Towns and villas concentrated populations in areas of economic productivity, while rural settlements continued traditional subsistence practices supplemented by Roman agricultural methods. Population estimates suggest substantial growth in southern and central England, supported by improved food production, infrastructure, and security. Roman citizenship, mobility of soldiers, traders, and administrators, and migration of continental populations contributed to cultural diversity within the province. By the late 3rd and 4th centuries AD, Roman Britain faced economic, military, and political challenges. External pressures from Picts, Scots, and Saxon raiders along northern and eastern frontiers prompted increased fortification, military redeployment, and reliance on auxiliary troops. Economic strain, evidenced by coin debasement, disrupted trade, and declining urban maintenance, affected both elite and rural populations. Administrative reforms under Diocletian and Constantine attempted to stabilize governance, with the division of provinces, appointment of vicarii, and increased military oversight. The decline of Roman authority culminated in the early 5th century. By 410 AD, imperial military and administrative withdrawal left England without formal Roman governance. Provincial towns, forts, and infrastructure remained, but local populations assumed responsibility for defense, resource management, and civic organization. The withdrawal initiated a period of vulnerability to external incursions, internal conflict, and cultural transformation, setting the stage for subsequent migration and settlement by Germanic peoples in the post-Roman period. Roman Britain represents a period of sustained cultural, technological, and administrative integration into the Roman Empire. Infrastructure, urbanization, agricultural intensification, metalworking, and trade networks reflect Roman influence, while continuity of Celtic tribal organization, religious practices, and local traditions persisted alongside imperial systems. The legacies of Roman administration, engineering, material culture, and settlement patterns continued to shape England beyond the formal end of Roman occupation, influencing subsequent historical developments in the early medieval period.